end, didn't he? Queried Holmes. Or is he still at large, shooting up towns in the Wild West? He sure had an end. But Pete advanced no further, and set to stirring his coffee vigorously and frowning at the brownish scum of milk which had gathered on the top. Well, this is a special occasion, you know. Crosby is going out to Chicago tomorrow, and I think Morgan ought to finish his last installment before Crosby leaves. Don't you, Pete? The force of Holmes' appeal was manifest at once in another roving of Pete's eyes. Crosby was his favorite of the three of us. There was no doubt about that. It was from Crosby that he had heard most of his favorite tidbits of sanguinary news. All right, let's have the death scene of Morgan. Holmes spread his elbows out on the table in a restful attitude of attention. Pete's eyes wandered to the corner of the room and stayed there a moment, and his spoon stopped in its incessant circling. Morgan didn't die, he said at last. Aha! Holmes rubbed his hands in anticipation. I get you now. It's better than a death scene. Enter the lady. She saved the soul of Morgan, huh? Crosby, I'll lay you 10 to 1 she was a blonde. Did she have dimples, Pete? Pete sighed. There wasn't no woman. It was apparent enough to me that the memory of the thing was torturing Pete. I would have stopped Holmes if I could, but he disregarded my frantic winking with a careless shrug of his shoulders. No woman? That's rotten luck, Pete, huh? Shut up, Holmes, broke in Crosby. This isn't your story. But what do you make out of it? Pete says that Morgan ended up with a bang, yet he didn't meet a woman and get saved, and he didn't die. Here Pete fortified himself with an exclamatory sip of coffee and cleared his throat noisily as he set down his cup. He waited with a curious intentness, knowing that the story was about to come. I could see Pete's plump face wrinkling a little with pain, or perhaps it was from the mere effort of memory. I don't know as I said that there. In a way, he didn't die, but in a lot of other ways he did die. Yep, I got a hunch that he died all right. He dropped his head and scowled as he drew a scroll on the tablecloth with the handle end of his knife. We exchanged glances of wonder, but no one spoke. It was down at Barclay's. I think I've told you a lot about Barclay's already, haven't I? Sure, said Holmes cheerily. This begins to look up. Barclay's was the road inn, wasn't it? Yep. That was the place where Morgan drank a quart of firewater one night on a bet, wasn't it? Yep. Some tank, exclaimed Crosby. Well, go ahead, old-timer. The death! The death! Exclaimed Holmes. Remember the goose and the golden eggs, Holmes? Said I. They had stood for Morgan a long time, went on Pete, as if he had not heard the comments. He'd never done no murder. He'd shot a couple of men, but fair fightin' always. That was the way it lay for a while. Sometimes they'd get up posses, chase him through the hills. All they got was a sight of him ducking around a curve a long ways ahead, or maybe some bullets kicking up dust just in front of them and telling them to keep back, sort of polite. And that was the way things stood for a long time. But Bridgewater was getting bigger and bigger. Finally, they got to be a city and had their own mayor and all that. That was how it started. He shrugged his fat shoulders and frowned over his coffee again. It seemed as though he hated to come to the point of his tale. Well, he went on, one night this guy, Morgan, holds up a stage coming into Bridgewater on the Caswell Road. It was the first stage he'd stuck up for nigh under 2 months. That was the funny part of it. He just did it sort of for the fun, because excitement was getting kind of low around here, and you can all buy into the fact that Morgan sure enough loved excitement. Yeah, we gathered that all right, grinned Crosby. I thought his finish came in a saloon, not holding up a stage, queried Holmes. Pete regarded him with equal parts of sadness and vexation. I'm trying to tell it from the start, because if there hadn't been no hold-up, there wouldn't have been no finish to Morgan in the saloon. You see, when he stuck up the stage, all he got was a couple of watches which stopped